All right, everybody, welcome to Sykes and Lewis. I'm Matt Lewis, Charlie Sykes. Psyched to see you, man. How you doing?
Yeah, happy President's Day.
It is
Okay, that
President's Day.
okay. So listen, I want to talk about the fact today's the second anniversary of the murder of Alexei Navalny. I want to get to the heavy stuff, but I have to do this rant on President's Day. And here's my confession. I'm somewhat negative on all of the federal holidays that are kind of packed into the calendar where there's no banking and there's no post mail service, and the rest of us have to go to work or go on with our lives. But President's Day, I mean, we have mucked this up so bad because you and I are old enough to remember when we had Lincoln's birthday and we had Washington's birthday, and that was great because Americans should take some time to think about the great good men who have led this country, right? What they said, what they believed in, what they warned us about. And for reasons that are pretty obvious, they crammed them together and then they called it President's Day. Now it's okay if it's Lincoln and Washington, but I think a lot of people out there, is this true now, Matt? A lot of people out there think it's all about all the presidents. And if there's one thing we should not be doing today, it is having a day where we talk about the awesomeness of the presidency. You follow me here?
Yeah.
That's like, I could have a Constitution Day or a Rule of Law Day or a Congress Day or a Balance of Powers Day. But right now, the last thing we need is let us celebrate the awesomeness of the presidency. Now, again, for those of you who want to push back on this, Washington, Lincoln, fine. I think we should spend the whole day, sort of reflecting and meditating on the fact that Abraham Lincoln once sat at the desk where, in the office where we now have Donald Trump. I mean, I think that would be the way to spend the day, but we're not going to. Rant over. Sorry.
Mm, I, so first of all, I guess I agree with you in the two different levels here, right? One level is I think any holiday that becomes like a day for mattress sales, car dealerships to promote, and no normal people are really going to a parade or grandma's house for dinner. Like if it's purely I get the day off and it's really about mattress sales, like I think that actually undermines this sort of sanctity of a federal holiday. And I think that's where President's Day is.
Oh,
And it may be partly because it's no longer George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. But yes, to your point, I mean, right now we're in this moment where Donald Trump is creating this cult of personality. He's uh, reinforcing the notion that the president has this carte blanche, dictatorial executive authority. And then to have a day called President's Day, to the degree anyone's paying attention, it would seem to
right.
reinforce that bogus notion.
Yeah, this was I've never been a big fan of President's Day, but this year particularly. By the way, you just mentioned that. Let me see if I can find it. Peter Baker's story over the weekend. Did you see this one? On my podcast later, I'm going to be talking with Susan Glasser, who's married to Peter Baker. Can you imagine what it would be like to sit around the dinner table with Peter Baker and Susan Glasser from the New Yorker? I mean, you could make a whole movie. You ever see, My Dinner with Andre? I
Oh,
think,
yes, that's a good movie. Yeah.
My Dinner with Peter and Susan, which I will never have probably. But Peter Baker had this outstanding article. Trump's relentless self-promotion fosters an American cult of personality. Trump is engaged in a spree of self-aggrandizement, unlike any of his predecessors, fostering a mythologized superhuman persona, and making himself the inescapable force at home and around the world. Part of this is like you don't know whether to laugh or cringe. He regularly depicts himself in a heroic, almost godly fashion as a monarch, as a Superman, as a Jedi Knight, as a military hero, even as a pope in a white cassock. Trump has spent a lifetime promoting his personal brand, slapping his names on hotels, casinos, airplanes, even steaks, neckties, and bottled water. What he's doing in his second term as president comes closer to building a cult of personality, the likes of which has never been seen in American history. So, yes, yeah, let's be clear. Spend a moment thinking about this is a country that was once led by George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and
Right.
this
And
is the way we've been shitified it.
and think about Washington and Lincoln, right? I mean, Washington, not only father of our country, um, general, but this is someone who, handed in his sword after winning the Revolutionary War
Yes,
and then stepped down
Yes,
willingly after 2 terms. Um, and then Lincoln, keeping the Union together, um, and just go read. We should probably all do this today, but like read his speeches. I mean, John Avlon wrote a really good book about him a couple
I
of
know. I
years
have
ago.
that. I have that right behind me. And just reading what Abraham Lincoln wrote, what an incredible mind. His scholarship and his values. I mean, the fact that someone of that intellect and character and depth of thoughtfulness could be the president of the United States is sort of reassuring. On the other hand, the one time I ever talked to Donald Trump, back in 2016, I actually made this point to him. He was engaging in some juvenile, your wife is ugly bullshit or something. And I said to him, you are running for the office once held by Abraham Lincoln. And, maybe you shouldn't be sounding like a 9-year-old schoolyard bully. Of course,
He just doesn't have the reverence and the solemnity and it, you know it's just amazing that he's in the same
I know,
discussion, the same category of being a president with Washington and Lincoln and some of the other greats.
right?
And it's again, not all presidents are created equal. I think there
No.
are presidents and then there are presidents, and we do not celebrate them all equally.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm going to be going out and, thinking thoughts about Millard Fillmore or James Buchanan today. I'm just
Yes,
going to take a pass on that.
and Trump is worse and more dangerous.
Wait, no, not even close. So I'm sorry, I hijacked the beginning of this. Well, what do you want to talk about today? Because there's so much.
Well, thank you for asking. We got a lot to cover, and I know you do. We should get to Navalny in a minute, but I wanted to bring up Marco Rubio. Did you see his speech at Munich uh, conference I think it was on Valentine's Day, actually.
Yeah, I'm going to spend Valentine's Day listening to Marco Rubio. Really? No,
Well, it's
I read about it and I watched clips of it.
okay. It's only, I think his speech is only like 30 minutes long, and it's
Yeah,
important because,
too long.
Ruby, he is attempting to tell a story and craft a narrative about America. This was very important in that regard. And it's also can be seen in contrast to J.D. Vance's speech
Yes,
to that same group last year, which was
agree.
Rubio's speech was much better received than Vance's. And I think that tells us a little bit about them. Vance is trying to change America's worldview and relationship with our allies in a very blunt way. Rubio's trying to sort of sneak it in, you know, and and um and I think we've had this conversation before, but depending on how you view Rubio, he's either more dangerous because he's more eloquent and sneaky. There's subterfuge in how he's bringing these ideas into our consciousness, or he's sort of a hero who has to play the game he has to play to get where
Not going with the hero part. Yeah, yeah. No, the word hero and Marco Rubio should not be in the same sense, at least on this show. But
So I watched the speech, Charlie, and there were three things that I took away from it. Three
yeah,
things that I think deserve mention. I'll just go in order, and then we can maybe discuss each
sure.
one as we go. So the first one is Rubio tells a story about America, and it's you would recognize it up until World War II, but he basically says after World War II, America wanted a world without borders, and America, sacrificed its sovereignty to these international organizations. But the one that he repeated over and over again was that America wanted a world without borders. And I think that's a stolen base. I think there's some truth to the fact, obviously, that immigration has, you know, sped up during, like with LBJ and things like that. But I think it's contested that I mean, very few people actually want a world without borders. But that he puts that out there as if it is a not even not even contested, that this is a foregone.
A little bit of gaslighting there,
Yeah.
but yeah, right. I mean, it's chum, right? That he's throwing out. Keeping in mind that he's talking to the Munich Security Council. I mean, these folks know, what borders are and what borders are not. So this felt like he was just throwing out one of the cliches of MAGA. Oh, on the other hand, I mean, obviously, did you see? By the way, I don't mean to digress. Hillary Clinton was there, and she was talking about migration and the the erosion of borders and that it had gone too far and it was very disruptive. It was really striking to hear it from Hillary Clinton. And I think it was Andrew Sullivan who said, if she said that back in 2016, history might be different. If any Democrat would say that. So, we're living in a time when it's so dangerous to engage in any nuance whatsoever. And I'm not accusing Marco Rubio of that because obviously no one really should support no borders whatsoever because then there are no nations, there are no countries, there is no control. It is absolute chaos. On the other hand, what is the regime that Marco Rubio is representing? And I see that's the thing is I don't want to fall in the trap of ever thinking that a speech is important unless you look like, okay, so who's behind it and what is he part of and
Hmm.
how does it translate into action? And we
Yeah.
see that right now. I mean, we see what's happening right now with
I think
Ukraine.
this I think this speech matters because it's very clear to me that Rubio wrote this speech. I mean, I'm sure it helped, but
Right, real quick.
this isn't like he's not just giving a speech someone wrote to give it like a perfunctory speech. Like he has a mission here, and he's basically laundering Trumpism, laundering America first, and doing more palatable worldview that can get applause in Munich and that could pass as being not that much of a departure from Reaganism. But I think if you really interrogate the things he's saying, they start to fall apart. So this first point,
Right.
the first point he is saying that after World War II, America decided we were going to be for open borders. That is clearly not true. There may be elements. The second point, the second thing that caught my attention, he said, armies don't fight for abstractions. And the assumption here is that post World War II, at least, America got away from um, talking about the things that really mattered. Like this is my interpretation, like blood and soil, and we started fighting for ideas, and that doesn't work. Um, Now, the interesting thing is, right after he said that, he talked about how Europe gave us these great things like the rule of law, you know, and the Beatles. But the rule of law, wouldn't that be one of those abstractions, Charlie, that
Of course it
is
is.
worth fighting for?
Freedom, democracy, territorial integrity, the rule of law. You make a great point here. At what point, if you don't fight for abstractions, then you are fighting for blood and soil, right? And of course, look, there's always a truth there, right? That there may be real politic reasons behind fighting a war, and for other for a variety of reasons, you want to convince the troops that they are fighting for the good and the just, right? This has been true forever. This is not a post World War II thing. But so yes, once again, there's a kernel of truth there. But as you interrogate it, like, okay, well, isn't the rule of law an abstraction? So we don't fight
Yeah.
for freedom. We don't fight for democracy. We don't fight for humanity. When we were fighting the Nazis, we were fighting for what? Some particular commodity. Remember, the Germans did not attack the United States. We were fighting for something. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I totally agree. And I should have pulled it before, but that great Reagan D-Day speech where he's talking about like democracy is worth fighting for because it's the only last best hope. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but
Yes.
Reagan certainly talked about what Rubio would, I think, dismiss as abstractions as the reason why America went as liberators, not as conquerors, and the reason why America went to Europe to defend
Yeah.
democracy. So I think this is bullshit, but he's clearly sneaking this in. And I think the danger, obviously, is that you could be a reasonable, rational, non crazy person and start to consume speeches like Rubio's giving you, and that becomes part of your worldview. And I think there are dangerous consequences for that. But in this regard, he's more dangerous than J.D. Vance, who does this in a very blunt way, right?
Well, yes, if in fact you really believe that right now politics is driven by these kinds of ideas and these kinds of things. will remember this speech for about 5 minutes until Donald Trump does something. I mean, just this morning, the Ukrainian government put out a statement, saying the United States is in the process of trying to coerce them and intimidate them into giving up more of their territory to the Russians. So there is that split screen. Marco Rubio is staying there because he is Donald J. Trump's cat's paw. Now, in terms of who's more dangerous, the contrast between him and Vance is getting a lot of attention because Vance just came there and just insulted everybody in the room, and everybody was offended, and he didn't change any minds. He did not win any, you know, um, didn't win any friends. Marco Rubio came in and was better received. They gave him a standing ovation in part because he was not J.D. Vance. But in the end, J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio are creatures of Donald Trump. But looking ahead, you're making an interesting point. Look, these kinds of isolationist ideas have not been invented by Donald Trump. They have been part of American political culture for a long time, and they are now being re-articulated. And it would be naive to think that isolationism, that kind of approach, does not have a certain potency in American politics. All you need to do is go back into American history. All the times when America tried to convince itself that, we are not the world's policemen, but we have nothing to do with it, that a war in Europe is, far away. Whereas Neville Chamberlain once put it so memorably when he was betraying Czechoslovakia, why should we fight a war for what was the phrase, a country far away that we know nothing of? Well, I mean, this is sort of the attitude. And Americans know nothing of much of the rest of the world, so why should we care about it, right? So this is going to be a potent force in conservative politics and American electoral politics for some time. So what you're saying is he's putting the
Yeah.
most attractive gloss on it. Still bullshit, but an attractive gloss on
And then
it. Now,
the third and final point that caught my attention was Rubio says, we want allies who are going to boldly race into the future, who are proud of their heritage. This is all a paraphrase here, right? And they shouldn't be obsessed with having to atone for their sins. So what he's basically saying is, hey, you in Europe, um, quit being so defensive and trying to like apologize for the past. Uh,
like,
let's
which
go.
past are you talking about here?
Well, that's the thing, right? No, look, I get it. Western civilization is something we should be proud of. It's
Yes.
brought a lot of good to the world. Um, and I do think there's a thing where you could be constantly like apologizing, like Columbus Day, let's, hand wringing about how horrible, self-flagellation. But if you're in Germany, you might want to reflect on what you did.
Right.
And you don't need to, like, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to never forget that.
Yeah.
And
No, it
he
is
seems
not
to
a
be
bad.
saying,
No.
let bygones be bygones.
This is the worst part of his message, I think, because they're remembering what happened in the past, for example, the Holocaust. I think is fundamental for human beings today to remember what we are capable of doing. What happens if we get our politics wrong? Why this matters? And I think that every once in a while we tend to think that, well, everything's going to work out fine, or this guardrail will hold, or these values can set them aside temporarily. That example, and there's so many, are so important to remind people, okay, this is why we have a rule of law. This is why we have a constitution. This is why we do not demonize the other. This is why we treat people with respect, because we are flawed human beings. I happen to believe in things like original sin, but I think the whole story of history is, reminds us, why did we create these systems? What was the point? The point was to prevent that from ever happening again. You cannot understand the world order that he's throwing in the trash can without understanding this world order was created so that we would never have something like that happen again. And I was like, hey, can we kind of forget about that? Please forget that that's a possibility. We live in a world, bristling still with nuclear weapons. What are we capable of doing to one another if we hate one another, if we demonize one another? So bullshit on Marco Rubio trying to say that,
Yeah.
let's just kind of move on from that whole Holocaust thing because, frankly, that wasn't within our lifetime, but it was very close to being within our lifetime. I mean, it was, this is our world.
Well, and so just to sort of conclude, as you know, I was a huge Marco Rubio fan somewhat of a fanboy at a certain point. It's sort of embarrassing, Charlie. And so Rubio does have this capacity to give a good speech, and I think he could have been a force for good, and it maybe in a different
So
universe,
disappointing.
a different
So
timeline. But my concern here is that he is basically this is like a Trojan horse that is sneaking ideas in that are contested ideas.
right.
He is now selling them as if they're settled history, that this is the way things were. It's not even contested the way he presents it. And that he's basically smuggling these ideas wrapped in Reaganism almost into the consciousness. Again, I don't want to overstate the importance of one speech, but that's I think what he's trying to
I
do.
know I understand what he's trying to do, and I think once again you just keep putting it into context, which actually is a great segue to what else that I wanted to rant about today, which is let's take everything that you just said about putting the gloss on the new post-war world and everything. Here's the reality: what's happening in Ukraine, how we are betraying the Ukrainians for the Russians, and I have to just say that let's just take a deep breath here. Today is the second anniversary of the murder by Vladimir Putin of Russian dissident leader Alexei Navalny. And what did we learn over the weekend? Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny died in prison after being poisoned with a deadly toxin found in Ecuadorian dart frogs, the UK and other allies claimed on Saturday. Of course, the Russians, claimed that he just, felt unwell, taking a walk. Yulia Navalny, the widow, appeared at a big press conference on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference at the same time. So Marco Rubio is in there, throwing, seashells and balloons, at everybody else. And she's saying, okay, that the UK, England, Sweden, France, Germany, and the Netherlands all are confident that Alexei Navalny was poisoned with lethal toxin. The British Foreign Ministry then put out a joint statement citing analyses of samples from Alexei Navalny. Now, this drug, epibotidine, sorry about that, is a toxin found in poisoned dart frogs in South Africa. In other words, wasn't acid, right? It is not naturally found in Russia. It is not clear how the toxin, which is 200 times stronger than morphine, was allegedly administered to Navalny. Okay, Vladimir Putin, we knew, is a murderer. He is a butcher. He murdered one of his leading opposition leaders. And yet, what are the consequences? What does it mean? What changes? His picture is still hanging in Donald
Mm,
Trump's White House. Donald Trump
mm.
put a picture of him up in the White House. Donald Trump is continuing to suck up to Vladimir Putin. Again, part of this is nothing new. When Trump was asked, well, he was asked by was it Bill O'Reilly? Well, your buddy Vladimir Putin, is a murderer, kills people. And Donald Trump says, well, lots of people murder lots of people. Okay, basically said I don't care. But here's a very specific case, and we should take a moment just to think about this. That now the whole world knows that Vladimir Putin murdered this opposition leader. And what are the consequences going to be? Is it going to change America's attitude toward Vladimir Putin? Will Trump not meet with Vladimir Putin? Will he take the picture of Vladimir Putin down from the White House? Will anything happen? So here's again, keep these ideas in your mind. Here's Marco Rubio out there, throwing rose petals or trying to put all kinds of, lipstick on this particular pig. And here's the pig sitting over there, whatever, how you want to describe it. I would like something uglier than pigs because I think pigs are actually kind of intelligent and sweet. And where Donald Trump's BFF is a flat out murderer. Now we know that Donald Trump doesn't care about that, right? I mean, we know, what is it? MBS from Saudi Arabia, murdered a journalist. And what does Donald Trump basically say? Hey, let bygones be bygones. So again, this is just one of those times when I do think, on this President's Day, we are marking the cold-blooded murder of someone who stood up to the president of another country. And the president of another country is being treated with kid gloves by the man who is the president of our country right now. This makes me nauseous. I have to say, this one gets me.
Yeah, it's part infuriating, part demoralizing. I can't believe the American people elected this guy twice, Charlie.
I mean, we get to vote. Every single show could start this way, And
sound
it's
like a
not like
broken
he didn't get.
record,
Yeah.
and there are things about Trump that we've learned this second term that have caused buyer's remorse, but
Mhm.
he is who we thought he was. I mean, when it comes to Navalny, when it comes to Putin, we knew this we knew this was Trump, and, like, first, what does it say about him as a human being that he doesn't care or that possibly he likes Putin better because of this? What does it say about us as a people? It certainly erodes
That's more disturbing.
any sort of moral authority that the United States might want to have.
These are abstractions, though, right? See, basically, if you
Yeah,
cut through the question you were asking about the abstraction, so is morality, is human dignity, are those abstractions? We don't fight for them anymore, right? That's not part of our foreign policy, you know. So we can make deals. We can cut deals and build hotels with a guy. And he's got blood all over his hands, but that's an abstraction, you know. The new Trump hotel, in Red Square, that's tangible. Oh, and by the way, could I connect two more dots here?
please.
This story comes out a week after the president of our country actually tried to arrest and criminally indict six sitting members of Congress. Um, Now you talked with David Frum last week too, right? We both
Mhm.
did podcasts with him, and he compares this to Charles the First of England, who eventually was overthrown and beheaded. And one of the great triggers for his being overthrown is not only was he spending money and raising taxes without the approval of Parliament, but he tried to arrest parliamentarians. And I think that when you send soldiers into Parliament to arrest your opponents, that was a bridge too far for the Brits in the 17th century. Just last week, Matt, our president tried to arrest and criminally indict six sitting members of the U.S. Congress. So Donald Trump, this is what we need to keep in mind. Donald Trump looks at Vladimir Putin and he feels envious.
Yeah,
He's not thinking, I want to be more like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. That is not
yeah.
that's not his intent.
And one of the things that I would bring up, in that interregnum when Biden was president and then when Trump started running again, is people would ask me like, "Do you think Trump could win again?" And, what are the odds that he would try to stay on again? How worried should we be?
Yeah.
And the thing is, what we don't know is how we don't know if Trump could stay on. We don't know if our institutions would hold. They did last time,
Yeah.
but we don't know. But here's what I think we do know. If Donald Trump could stay in power, he
Oh,
would. That
absolutely.
I think you would have to be either incredibly stupid or incredibly naive to disagree with that, right? It's pretty obvious. And so shouldn't that be a disqualifier of coming within 100 miles of
Well,
Washington?
January 6th should have been a disqualifier. I mean, you and I ought to, go into a darkened room and write a list of all the things Donald Trump that should have been disqualified. After he tried to overthrow the government and overthrow the election in January 6th, that should have been the tip off, right? I mean, that's like we're discussing these, possibilities. Wait, no, no, no. This actually happened. We saw it happen. I know that there's an attempt to say the Jedi mind trick. No, it was a peaceful protest. No, we saw what's going to happen. And this is one of the iron laws of history that Stephen Miller likes to talk about, right? That the strong take from the weak, but also the strong do not give up power when they have it willingly.
Yeah. Which
And this
brings me to another hypothetical. If Donald Trump could just get rid of his enemies, would he do that? I don't know. He doesn't seem to care about MBS or Putin doing it. In fact, he may like them better. He might admire that.
I'm showing restraint right now.
Well,
But
the good news, Charlie,
what
is
was
that if there is a list that they start going down, they'll get to you way before they get to me. So,
Well, I'm hoping that they have a very no. I think I'm pretty far down on the list, but thank you for that. That is actually the nicest thing as anybody said.
Mm.
I don't know. So, is there anything happy to talk about today? I'm looking at
Uh,
my listing was somewhere. Oh, the piece you sent me about South Texas. being red or
Yeah.
blue, which I thought
Yeah.
was is maybe one of the most interesting political stories of the year.
Yeah, this
You
is
got that one?
interesting. This is interesting, Charlie, because I've been hearing around here in West Virginia
Hmm.
that home builders who tend to be conservative are very upset. They don't want to talk publicly, but they're very upset because their workforce is basically done. They're gone. In fact, there's one guy around here who's talking about basically getting some immigrants, um, putting them up, getting them drivers who drive them in separate vehicles to work on the projects. I mean, you know, so there is this story. Let me just read a little bit of this. He said, the headline, South Texas will never be red again. Home builders warn GOP over Trump's immigration raid. So this is from Politico.
Hmm.
Home builders are warning President Donald Trump that his aggressive immigration enforcement efforts are hurting their industry. They're cautioning that Republican candidates could soon be hurt too. Construction executives have held multiple meetings over the last month with the White House and Congress to discuss how immigration busts on job sites and in communities are scaring away employees, making it more expensive to build homes in a market desperate for new supply. We could go on and on and on, but I'll just get to the nut graph here. I told lawmakers straight up, South Texas will never be red again, said Mario Guerrero, the CEO of the South Texas Builders Association, a Trump voter who traveled to Washington last week. So the funny thing here is not only is Trump immediately pissing away this like coalition that Republicans have
Was it?
aggressively courted for decades, and Trump stumbled somehow into, getting them to start hitting his way in 2024, and then he immediately has alienated them. But the other
Amazing.
funny part, Charlie, as you know, is that the Texas redistricting
Yes, that's what makes it so interesting.
was based on the premise that these
Yeah.
were now Trump voters.
Oh, see, this was, fascinating. So you had he basically rented, a lot of Hispanic voters in South Texas, one strong border. They don't want a borderless thing. They are very anxious to make sure that the people who played by the rules, stood in the line, are treated fairly, and they don't want the influx. So they voted Republican. It was a very very dramatic shift. And so based on that, the Texas, legislature decided that, well, we're going to gerrymander the state and we're going to, make a long story short, a lot of that gerrymandering, that really too clever by half gerrymandering was on the assumption that the people who voted for Trump are still going to vote for Trump. If in fact you alienate them in huge numbers, your whole gerrymandering thing just blows up in your face.
Yeah.
And all the numbers that I'm seeing, and this is not just anecdotal, are the cratering of support among young people, cratering of support among the Hispanic community. And if you're in the Hispanic community right now, how many steps of separation you have to have with somebody who lives in fear, who's been asked for their papers, thinking ICE is going to be showing up? It's
Yeah. Or even
totally
even
predictable,
even if you're a citizen or you're here legally, you're
right?
gonna get harassed, hassled. If I thought, I could go to work
Oh,
today,
mm,
work my butt off in the heat, putting a roof on someone's house, and as a reward, I'm probably gonna like be hassled by ICE. I might even be detained for a week before they figure out that, oh yeah, he's actually is a citizen. Like, why would I sign up for that?
no, exactly. And so we're also, I mean, the other big story of the last week was the apparent. I mean, ICE is this is ICE's time in the barrel. I mean, they have obviously become a huge political anchor on the Trump administration. You had the withdrawal from. There's been a lot of withdrawals, or at least public withdrawal from Minneapolis. I mean, they left. I think pretty much in disgrace. They pulled out the National Guard around the country. Now you have Kristi Noem, who's I was saying, we're going to have ICE agents around polling places to make sure we elect the right people. Yeah, there was a slip there, I suppose. Um, but this has not been a great week for ICE, and the fact that they actually now have had to publicly admit that some of their ICE agents who'd engaged in a shooting lied about it, and that they're being investigated. Now, I don't have any hope that the Justice Department will do a fair and reasonable job, but you're starting to see cracks. that 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 they're having now to admit that some of this body cam video and other are showing that much of what ICE said about its assault on Americans is a lie.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's the same old
and
story, right?
Mhm.
They charged us, they attacked us with
Right,
guns, and
which cops have been saying now for what, 100 years when they shoot somebody. Oh, I was defending myself. Before body cams, I think 99.999% of the time, people believed them and gave them the benefit of the doubt.
this latest example was even more colorful. They said they attacked a federal law enforcement officer with a shovel or a broomstick,
Yes, right.
and the incident was
Very
part of an
specific.
attempt to evade arrest and obstruct law enforcement. God forbid.
Right. And
Uh, the shovel or the
I'm
broom, it could
thinking,
be either one. No, it just makes you wonder, right? Like now, every time they say that someone was attacking a police officer, we have to assume it's bullshit or a law enforcement officer. Until we see the evidence, I think we just have to assume it's a lie because every time it is. The last 3 times I've heard this story, it has been a lie. Um, so
and
why?
yet they're moving ahead. I mean, people ought not to think that that this has solved itself. They're spending. What was the story over the weekend? The tens of billions of dollars they're spending buying up massive warehouses, create more of these migrant gulags. What could go wrong there? And I keep asking the question. We see what they do in public in broad daylight when they're being watched. What do you think they're doing when no one's watching? This is always the question.
Yeah,
What do you think they're doing when there are no cameras? What do you think is happening in those detention facilities? What's happening when we are warehousing thousands of people with the kinds of people that we now know are running this sort of thing? It is a nightmare that's being done in real time on our watch in our name.
yeah, it's like living next to Auschwitz or something, right?
Oh,
I think there was a
you
movie
know,
about that. No, they're trying to put one right near me in Hagerstown, Maryland, not too far from where I am.
mm-hmm.
Um,
No,
there's a NIMBY issue. They're trying to put one in like Alabama or something, and the
yeah,
local Republican
they
politicians
don't
don't
want.
want
No, no, no.
they don't want it down there. Which I think that's the perfect place to put it. Is where they don't want it. But no, it's a scary thought, Charlie. And I do have a couple of concerns about right now. One concern I have is it seems like if ICE kills somebody, then there's a huge backlash and the media focuses on it and it's a huge story and it does hurt Trump. It seems like anything else. They could blind you, shoot you in the face with whatever, some projectile or, they can beat you up, shoot you in the leg. There's a little backlash, but that doesn't seem to move the needle. So anything short of death seems like it's okay.
Well, okay, I will be slightly more cynical and then I will be more hopeful. Okay, um, the slightly more cynical approach is as long if they kill a white person
Oh yeah.
who's
Sorry.
innocent. And yeah, I mean, this is,
Yeah.
let's be honest about what happened up in Minneapolis. But you are right. There have been many, many shootings that have not generated this kind of outrage. On the other hand, I don't know about your social media feed. Mine is absolutely filled with these videos. Clearly illegal. Just spraying a protester in
Mm.
the face with there's a cumulative effect of it over and over and over and over again. So it's not just, he said, she said in any specific case. But you are right. Part of the problem, and you and I talk about this every week, there's the problem of outrage fatigue, keeping up with
Yeah.
everything. And this is part of you flood the zone with shit, but you also flood the zone with brutality. You flood the zone with outrage, and then people just get exhausted. They don't know what to look at, what to believe. And also, frankly, it's at a certain point you just say, I can't take it. I can't keep injecting this stuff into my head. And I think that's one of our challenges, right? Not to
Well,
succumb to the outrage fatigue.
I think part of the problem too, or part of my concern too, is that Tom Homan is to Kristi Noem what Marco Rubio is to JD Vance, which is to say
Oh, I think he is.
that Tom
He,
Homan comes into Minnesota, comes into Minneapolis, and he could, as far as we know, he could be just as ruthless and be imposing
he is.
the same exact worldview, but doing it in a much smarter, uh, strategic,
We're
way that the
talking.
media that resonates with the media.
Oh, you're talking about the guy with a face like a ham who had $50,000 stuffed in his camo bag. I am not sure that if I was drawing up the scenario of the kinder, gentler, more approachable face, it would be Tom freaking Homan. But I understand what you're trying to say is
Yeah.
what they're going to try to do is at some you would have thought they would have done this a little bit earlier, come up with a more reasonable explanation or face. But I think, part of it is that whatever they say, you still have Donald Trump, you still have Stephen Miller, you still have all of these other folks who cannot shut up. And by the way, we ought to at least mention, since you and I haven't spoken since then, this is the Donald Trump that put out the blatantly racist video about Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, and then last week he's defending it. So they've gone back from it was this low level staffer. No one has been disciplined for this. He's now saying it's very, very strong. There was one report that he's angry at anyone that broke with him or criticized him about this and said, you are dead to me. So again, all the shit flows from the top. I mean, it all flows down. So all of this attempt, like, let's put in a pretty face like Tom Homan to make people think this is better, it's just not going to work. As
Yeah, I
long
think
as these,
eventually it won't work because they can't stick to it. They can't be
right,
disciplined.
and there's too much
But
money.
it would be if they figure it out, we can do everything we want to do in a way that will fly under the radar. That would be more dangerous. But I don't think they could stick to that plan because, um, you know, remember, Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski wanted to videotape
You
ICE
like that?
beating people up. Like that was a feature, not a bug. I mean,
Okay,
so
can I just ask you? Yeah, right, no, and they want this whole Chrissy Noem Lewandowski thing. I hope everybody read that Wall Street Journal report about how just totally dysfunctional they are. Okay, now I'm not attributing any sort of reasonable logic to the Trump White House. On the other hand, how does Susie Wiles, the chief, said, how did they let Christy Nome bring the person that everyone thinks is her paramour into her office? It seems like an open secret this is going on. Corey Lewandowski has been a loose cannon, a deplorable, chode for years and years and years. How did they not know that this was going to be a clusterfuck of the ages? I mean, I'm just wondering. I mean, how? Okay, I apologize to assume that they would have been any reasonable, but this one, I mean, man, what do you think?
I think it's because Corey was Trump's campaign manager, and I think,
Fired him like 6 times, right?
but he keeps bringing him back. So there's that weird dysfunctional relationship. So I think that Corey's the reason Christino became secretary, to begin with. Um, yeah. But look, Charlie, and I know you got to jump. We got to wrap this up. But
Mm.
the fact that like you and I talk every week, and we probably have never talked about the Obama video, monkey video image that Trump truth. We probably didn't talk about the hearing with Thomas Massey, the Epstein hearing with Thomas
No, oh
Massey.
god, the Pam Bondi meltdown,
Like, I just think that the fact that we didn't even get to that because it's now old news
or the
tells
Epstein files.
tells you everything you need to know about the news cycle that we exist in these days. So
Great point, but that's why we do this every week.
that's right. And
You did do it every day, which I used to do, but
well, and you and I probably did have those conversations with other guests in between. So, like we both talked to David Frum. So if you're out there looking for a video, some listening for this President's Day or some viewing, check those videos out. He's always good.
President's Day, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, nobody else. This is not James Polk Day. This is not Millard Fillmore Day. This is not Benjamin Harrison Day. This is not Herbert Hoover Day. This is Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Although, boy, I don't know. For that.
Should it just be
And
called
you're not going to get
Washington and
me.
Lincoln Day? I think part of the
Yeah, why
part of
couldn't
the
you have done
process.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do it. You and me. Let's start calling it that.
Okay. So we'll do that.
All right, my friend. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to subscribe to us. Stay tuned. We'll be back here next week. And God bless. Happy Washington and Lincoln Day, everybody. See you, Charlie.
Happy.